IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila institution. We're a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring a fresh perspective to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hi, welcome to today's episode of All Things Policy. I'm your host today, Sridhar Krishna from Takshashila Institution. With me, I have two of my colleagues from Takshashila Institution, Rijesh Panicker, who's a fellow with our high-tech and geopolitics group. And I've got Bharath Reddy, who's a regular podcaster on All Things Policy, who's a program manager at Takshashila and looks after our GCPP programs. Right. So, welcome to this podcast, Rijesh and Bharath.
Thank you, Sridhar.
The telecom operators today in India are losing a lot of revenue to service providers like WhatsApp. Right. Many calls that we make to each other nowadays are on WhatsApp rather than on over Airtel or Vodafone, etc. And the telecom operators claim that they're losing revenue. The second aspect of it is that they feel that OTT players like Netflix, etc., are using up a lot of bandwidth, and this is forcing these telecom operators to make larger investments on their infrastructure, have greater bandwidth, etc., and that is increasing their cost of operations. At the same time, these people are unable to pass on these rates, or at least they believe that they're unable to pass on these costs to consumers. And as consumers, we're all paying lower and lower rates for internet access. So I think this is something. So the telecom operators seem to have approached the government and the communication ministry, etc., and said that, hey, they're losing a lot of revenue. These are guys. There are people on this who are riding free riders on our platform, who are not paying for using this platform, but are generating a lot of revenue out of it. So they're saying that people like WhatsApp, people like many of these other OTT players should share a part of their revenue and their ad revenue with them in order to sort of to augment some of the increased cost that they're having to pay on account of large bandwidth usage. The TRAI, maybe connected to this or not connected to this, we don't know. The TRAI floated a consultation paper recently on regulatory mechanism for over-the-top communication services and selective banning of certain OTT services, right? And our colleagues here, our guests on the show, Rijesh and Bharath, have written an interesting, have crafted responses to the TRAI consultation paper. And so I thought they would be ideal people to have on this show. So, Bharath, do you want to go first? What's the point of view that before we go into details of this survey that TRAI is hoping to have and asking questions of various people? Why don't you tell us what's the stand of the telecom operator? Can you share with us what's their view?
Right. Thanks, Sridhar. So the TRAI consultation paper actually focuses on two questions. So the first one is on this idea that over the past decade or so, the data consumption by users has increased exponentially, and this is largely due to the growth of the so-called OTT platforms. This includes things like what we use for communications, like WhatsApp, Telegram, Signal, and so on, and also the platforms like YouTube or Netflix or any of these other entertainment platforms. So all of these have led to an exponential growth in mobile data consumption, and this is over mobile networks, which these operators have spent a lot of money deploying across the country. So their claim is that they have had to incur a lot of these costs, and in India, at least, the data usage charges are very low, one of the lowest in the world. And so the reasons for that could be there could be other reasons for that. But what the operators claim is that they've had to incur so much of investment, and a lot of these OTT platforms are benefiting from this network without having to pay for it. So that's one claim, that they're not sharing the costs involved in deployment. The second thing is that the operators incur a lot of they need to comply with a lot of regulations, like the licensing for spectrum, the licensing to provide like phone or messaging services. There's that, and there's also uh, uh, universal service obligation fund that they need to contribute to, so that telecom service could be provided in harder to reach and low density areas. So all of these things that the mobile network operators are expected to pay for, and because of the infrastructure that they have helped set up, these other OTT platforms are able to benefit from it, is their claim. That they have not had to incur any expenditure. Now, because of this, someone else is free riding off of this and making a lot of, having a lot of subscribers, getting content, creating content, making revenue of that content. So that's their basic argument, I would think. Maybe Rijesh could add to that if I missed something.
Thanks, Bharath. No, I think you've covered most of that. I don't think there's much more to add. It's just interesting that this topic has come up again. This is a debate originally from the 2015-2018 era, right? Before the net neutrality thing, telecom operators all had a similar argument. Then TRAI eventually ended up saying, no, we want net neutrality. You can't charge you can't charge OTT players for these kind of content. We want it to be open. And I'm not entirely sure what TRAI was thinking then and what the reasons were for going in that direction. Presumably because in 2015, our markets were not anywhere near as big as they are today. So perhaps then the feeling was that we still need to let this market grow and mature. And if you look at it from that perspective, maybe in 2022, one could say that now the market is mature. Now perhaps there is no more need for subsidy. Perhaps now we should actually price data at its economic value. Right? And I think we were just discussing it a while back. So again, just bringing up that point, that there might be an actual need for thinking whether the prices we pay today are in fact subsidized prices and not viable for the network. Just a question to throw out there.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I mean, I agree that maybe we're not paying the value for data at its economic value, right? Maybe it is being subsidized by us, subsidized by the telecom operator in some sense, and that's why they feel that they need to get more revenue out of it. But nobody forced them to lower prices, right? People were paying a certain amount of money for data in the past. When we were paying that kind of money for data, we were sort of often reluctant to use data quite the way we do it today. I remember a time when we never watched Netflix on your phone using mobile data because you thought that, you just get such a huge bill and you didn't want to use up all the data that you had doing something like that. You'd rather wait till you got home and watched it, right? Now people I see you I see while commuting, sitting in the car and like watching something, or in the bus and watching something on Netflix because data is so cheap, nobody cares, right? So they chose to bring down the price of data quite significantly in order to increase the subscriber base. Now they seem to be complaining about not getting enough revenue out of it. Can you explain why that might be the case, and why did they sort of lower the prices in the first place, and why are they complaining now? Bharath, do you want to take that?
Yeah, Bharath, you want to go first?
Yeah, so I think the prices that we pay for data today is largely a result of the intense competition that we have seen in the telecom market over the past few years. Right? So Jio came in with like dirt cheap prices, and that forced a lot of. It was very competitive. A lot of other service providers had to close down. There were mergers of some of them, and we are left with maybe uh, three private sector telecom service providers and one BSNL. So this consolidation has happened largely as a result of Geo coming and offering very cheap data and calling services so that they could gain market share. And now that they've gained a significant amount of market, I think now they're the largest, or maybe the second largest, I'm not sure, by number of subscribers. So I think the prices that we have seen should stabilize now. You will not, it will not remain as cheap as it was over the past few years.
Yeah.
And we have seen that increasing over the past this thing. So, but one interesting, so I wouldn't call it a subsidy. It's more of a price war in a sense to gain market share. But as a result of that is that data being cheap has brought a lot of people onto the you know digital
Network.
platforms and onto the network. So and there are positive externalities that come out of that. So you have a lot of, say, people owning a phone nowadays. You have a lot of people using UPI, for example. All of these are interlinked, right? So you buy a phone so that you can access all of these services, and now you're able to make digital transactions and do so much more with and avail, say, government services and things like that. So so that's what.
So great. I mean, I think we'll figure out what happens. Rijesh, you want to add to that before I go to the next question?
Yeah, so the point you made, right, that the prices were reduced by the players themselves, so there's no reason they can't go back and hike back their prices, right? I mean, in a truly competitive market, you should mark your services at the price that you think is viable. I mean, why? So it's interesting that neither player, I mean, either of them could choose to say, Geo, for example, could choose to say, look, I don't care what the policy is. I'm going to charge a higher price for my customers, or I'm going to ask my content providers to pay me more, or else get off my network. But neither of them wants to do that. They actually want to bring in regulation that says that you're obligated to pay me the money. So it is interesting that they choose to go the regulation route rather than saying we'll compete. It's a market, and I think my services are better, so I can charge a higher price. They don't want to do that. Actually.
Yeah, because they clearly can't go to the content providers and say, now you pay me for it, right? I mean, like that would be contrary to any net neutrality argument that we have. If, like, Netflix pays more for bandwidth usage than, let's say, Prime, and then, like, we are all forced to watch Netflix at a higher subscription rate than it is to watch Prime, maybe, right? So we don't want that to happen. As a consumer, I think having access to different services on the internet, whatever, a free access to different services, and not dictated by the service provider is something that we've all started taking for granted, at least, right? So I think there was a move in 2015, like you mentioned earlier, Rijesh, that they would offer internet access for free to lots of people, give them certain content.
That was Facebook, right? Yeah. They wanted a bundled internet
Facebook.
Yeah,
correct. Yeah, they wanted to provide bundled internet access to various services, etc. And therefore, then people said, no, that would give unbridled power in the hands of one person. And let people pay for it. Let people choose the content they want. Let people pay for the service provider that they want. So now, what is the government's interest in this? Why is the government now suddenly talking about things which appear to be going contrary to well-established net neutrality norms that we're taken for granted?
So I think,
Rijesh?
Yeah, with this new set of consultation that the TRAI has done, I'm not certain that the government's interest in it is in moving away from net neutrality. I think the government's point of view now is that, over the last few years, from the last time we've looked at this thing, OTT services have become massive, especially communication services, right? Whether it is WhatsApp, Signal, Telegram, whatever it is, their reach is much, much more than it was in 2015. I mean, it's a step change. So I think the question the government is coming from is now, or even YouTube and any TikTok, any such channel like that. So the question is, these have become very influential in how opinions are being generated, how news moves through the country. So then, as a government that is concerned about the safety, in our security interest, what should we do about these OTCs? Should we let them continue to operate as they are without any regulation, or should we now think about being able to, you know, put some layer of regulation on top of them for specific purpose? I think that was more the intent of this particular TRAI consultation, as opposed to any focus on whether net neutrality is required or not. I think there was a slight difference.
There was some conversation. There was a question there, right? I mean, one of the questions, if I understood right, was around what is the. Should these people, the OTT services and the internet service providers, sort of collaborate? What should be the type of collaboration that they should do? Wasn't that one of the questions in that questionnaire that they sort of came up with?
You want to take that, Bharath?
Yeah, so I think going back to Rijesh's question, I think that's probably what has triggered this round of consultations and discussions. So there are two questions here. So one is, like we started off with, one is the sharing of the network costs. That's one issue that's being discussed. And the second is that these OTT communication services, which are all of these WhatsApp, Signal, Telegram, and so on, they don't operate with a license. Whereas telecom service providers need a license. So do you need them to pay a license? Do you need them to pay a fee? All of these are also questions that are being raised. So now there are a lot of interesting repercussions that come out of requiring them to have a license or requiring them to pay a fee, right? So one of them, for example, would be that these platforms operate globally. For example, WhatsApp has a global user base, and they're able to make international calls or send a message to anybody anywhere in the world because they operate at that scale. Now, if they have to comply with regulations in India and regulations in another country, and all of these are very different, requiring them to pay different fees, so it kind of makes it a lot harder for these kind of platforms to operate the way they do. And you might maybe see services not being offered in a certain country which has very strict requirements that they need to comply with. So this kind of the benefits that we get from having a platform of this scale that is accessible globally, that might not be there if all of these regulations kick in at different geographies, right? So so that's and you might have licenses, and you might see the government then trying to require these platforms to say moderate content or break end-to-end encryption because or their license might be withdrawn. So all of these kind of leverage will come into play if these kind of things were to be brought in.
Yeah, so we'll come back to the OTT operator's point of view after a short break.
Stay tuned to All Things Policy. We'll be right back after a short commercial break.
So thank you very much. There was a break, and then now let's talk about the OTT operator's point of view. Rijesh, do you want to say something about that? I mean, what's their view on all this? Are they concerned at all about this TRAI's consultative paper and the fact that these questions are being raised again? People thought it was settled in 2018. Now that it's being raised, what are their views?
So to me, OTT players are obviously going to be concerned about, because if you just look at the market structure of the OTT space, it's highly competitive. Right? Everybody talks about WhatsApp being dominant. That's just like Facebook being dominant or Google being dominant. That does not there's a very long tail. For every WhatsApp that succeeded, there are 100 other chat apps that came and went. It's a very, very competitive space, and it's given for free for the users. I mean, I can't think of any paid OTT messaging platform, for example. Or YouTube is free. Everything is free for the most. So, and so their perspective is that, look, whatever we are doing, it enhances the consumer welfare, which Bharat also spoke about. All these users who are coming in and who are able to use all of this, that add externalities in terms of how the consumer's welfare goes up, and that's clearly the case. Like, today a content creator can create a YouTube channel and host it, make money off it, make a living off it, which is not possible say 10 years. Right? So that's their point of view, and therefore, if you start applying a similar unified license to them and force them to pay the licensing fees the way they are today, then they believe that most of them will become unviable. Most of them will start stopping services in India. And so what happens to consumer welfare in India? That's also not just that's the OTT's perspective, but I think that's also the perspective of a lot of consumer activists who are saying that no, don't do that, because we need to ultimately consider why we need expensive mobile networks in India and why we should let more people use it as opposed to less. So I think that is the answer.
Okay. Anything that you want to add on this, Bharath?
So one thing is you already have your mobile network operators are already charging users for the data that they consume. So again, charging the OTT platforms would be in a way double charging for the same contents that's being consumed.
Correct. Yeah.
And this is not a debate that's new, right? So the same debate is also going on in Europe, where there's this the operators are asking for the OTT platforms to share a burden of the network costs, because they're also facing the same kind of constraints. They're also facing the pressure to invest on upgrading their infrastructure to 5G and newer technologies, whereas the revenues are there's a lot of competition among the different operators. So this is something that's going on in other countries as well. So one thing that's being proposed is that the sending network party, I'm not sure if I'm getting this right. So the sending party pays. Basically, the provider of the content is expected to pay is one form of the argument, which is what this is. Whereas the other one is that the consumer is expected to pay for whatever they consume. Right? So those are the two different kinds of approaches to this. And so I see that it's a fairer way to charge people based on what the consumer is consuming, because they can choose to consume how much ever they want. They have the incentive to cut back or watch more or whatever it is that they want to do. Right? So that's one form of the argument. And for OTT platforms, the other thing is that like Rijesh was saying, there's a lot of creative destruction that's at play here. So you see only the biggest and most dominant platforms today, but there's a lot of other. For each WhatsApp, there's probably 100 other companies that have tried and failed. So when you have these kind of costs being imposed, you might not see all of those other companies coming up. So, but there's a small distinction here. So when the telecom operators are asking for OTT platforms to share a part of the costs, they're not expecting. They're still putting a caveat saying that only the biggest operators, maybe based on the amount of usage or based on the number of subscribers. So only the biggest ones need to pay, maybe not the smaller ones, so that you still have an opportunity for the startups to come and make it without having those constraints. But it's still like, where do you draw that line? How are you going to make them this thing? And what is the right way of doing it? So you already have one party paying for it. So do you?
Just ask that party to pay more, right, Bharat? I mean, I would think. I mean, to me, it just seems a absolute no-brainer to just make the consumer pay a higher charge for data usage. So then the real economic cost of actually watching a film on Netflix film on your mobile phone is paid for by the person who watches it. If you feel it's too expensive to watch a film, we don't go to a movie hall. If the right price is charged by the data service provider to the consumer, then the data service provider uses it for the services that they can consume usefully, right? I mean, so that to me seems to be the right way to do this, and not charge somebody because who's making money out of it. Therefore, I'll charge the guy who's making money. Because then, but nobody's talking about. I read some interesting stuff on X, formerly Twitter, on somebody saying that, hey, I mean, no one's talking about charging for email service providers for the fact that they're using email over the net, over the internet. There are people who have made millions and millions of dollars on account of this. I mean, the entire internet. I mean, Google is one of the most valuable companies in the world. It made its money because it has people use the internet and they use Google. If people didn't, I mean, Google's not sharing its ad revenue. Nobody's saying Google should share its ad revenue with the internet service providers. But somehow, just this messaging and calling and that kind of people, and the fact that these guys are content providers, I mean, why are they asking for them? That's something that I have not understood. Any insights on that, Rijesh? Why one group of people is being targeted than the other?
That's actually an interesting question. I hadn't really thought about that angle of it, but let me try. So, I think it has to do with not all data is the same, right? That idea just occurred to me when Bharath was talking about it. But me watching a Netflix show is not the same as me getting an email, because that's not instantaneous. It's okay if I see it 2 hours later or it doesn't arrive instantly, right? But for the Netflix video, if the quality of my data connection is slightly bad, then the entire experience is disrupted. So not all data is the same. And I think that is why there is this focus on some kinds of OTT channels. So it's interesting because it kind of goes to the heart of net neutrality a little bit. If I say that I should be able to charge more to consumers and they should pay more for content, then why can I not say that I should be able to charge for the quality of the connection to the consumer? So I will charge you more if you want to watch Netflix, but I will charge you less if you don't want to watch Netflix, for example. Right?
Yeah,
that's another way to differential charge, right? But then you're effectively discriminating between two different types of data. You're saying that video data will come at a high speed and you'll pay more for it, and if you don't want that, you pay less. And there is differential access in some sense.
But that's not impacting, in my mind, net neutrality, right? If you say that you're charging a higher rate for a certain quality of data, I mean, like, for lower lag, higher speed, if you want to charge, I mean, that's what's required for a good video experience. Then you pay for such a connection and you pay more for it. And if all that you are going to use your internet for is to read some news or do something like read an email which will get delivered to you a little later, or read news that has already been around, whatever it is, then I think you can pay less if you are using less data, and pay more if you're using high data at high speeds, etc. So low speed data versus high speed data rates are different today. I mean, if you get an internet connection with a 30 Mbps speed, or whether you want one with a 100 Mbps or a 1 gig or even more, then like you pay more, right? So what's wrong with that?
Nothing, but just it seems to me a bit of a slippery slope, because once you go down that road, then what if, say, Jio says, oh, we have a tie-up with Netflix and they are hosting their servers right at our data centers and you're going to get better quality. It's a fairly valid argument from a consumer welfare perspective, but that's definitely not technical.
Yeah. Okay.
Right? Then you're going down the same route. Yeah. And then you're going down the same route of Jio has decided that Netflix will be better for you as opposed to Amazon if you're on the Jio network. Even though it's being couched as consumer welfare, right? So I think that it's kind of tricky, but I can kind of see it going down that route.
Okay. And
Sridhar, just to add something to what Rijesh was saying. Right? So I used to work in the telecom sector, so I just wanted to add a little bit of detail to what Rijesh talked about, there being different kinds of data. So for any data that we use, right? So um, there's a different quality of service category attached to different kinds of data. So, for example, you can have voice data, you can have video data. So all of these are time sensitive in that when I'm talking, there should be no lag. But it's okay if a few parts of the data are lost. It's not necessary that every syllable, every
packet losses don't matter so much.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't want to use the word packet, but yeah. So packet loss is not a very big concern in those for those kinds of data. But for example, and there might be real time gaming or something like that where the time criticality is even more of a concern. On the other hand, you might be doing a file transfer where packet loss is not at all tolerated, right? So even a single part of one byte is lost, then your entire file might be compromised and you need to download the whole thing again. So there are different forms of data. They're treated differently when you are trying to access it. So that's just something I thought I should
it's interesting. Yeah, while you were saying this, I was thinking about the way services trade. I was talking the other day and I realized that when you look at, while 63% of our global GDP is in services, only 21% of our global GDP of global trade is in services, right? So only 21% is in services, but technology aided by the internet, a high-speed, low-cost internet is allowing for a big structural shift even in services. With healthcare, environmental services, education, these were typical services which are only provided in person and might become more easy to provide remote. You could have like doctors with 5G and now 6G maybe. Doctors may be able to provide robotic surgery sitting in a remote location in a more effective fashion to some patient who is in Africa or something. Is the internet services providers case then that the doctors should also share some of their revenue with the internet service provider because they are making money out of the fact that they're getting high speed internet. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, Rijesh, what's your thought?
Exactly. I mean, like, it's interesting, right? Because once you open the door to monetize it in that fashion, then you can monetize anything. Tomorrow, you might say, Aadhaar should pay some money back to the telecom operators because so many Aadhaar authentications are happening. Or UPI, you're doing over 10 billion a day, so obviously you got to pay for the network.
Yeah.
Where does it end? That's the problem. Like,
exactly.
The government should ultimately say it doesn't matter because for us, UPI doing 10 billion transactions is more important than whether you make money.
Yeah. And so that's that's interesting. Anyway, so I think it seems to be clear what the thinking of the three of us is. But I'm also happy that we covered some of the views of the telecom service providers. It's a fact that they are making less money today than they were making earlier because of because they're having to provide faster and faster speeds at lower and lower costs. And it's been great for us as to be a consumer in the last decade. But as service providers, I think it's something that they need to find solutions to. Maybe we have to be prepared for a higher rate of higher cost for paying the more appropriate economic value for our data, as Rijesh was mentioning. And it's true that the telecom service provider is not having to pay all these license fees, etc., to the government, but people like WhatsApp, etc., providing similar service are not having to provide that. I know, Bharath, you had some arguments about how these are not exactly similar services and there are differences, etc. But the point is that they are providing, at some level, the service at a base level is the same. I mean, like, if I want to call you, like today, in fact, I wanted to call you. I just called you on the cell phone. I didn't call you on WhatsApp. And sometimes I just called you on WhatsApp and I just do it casually. I mean, just depends on where I'm sitting at the home at a particular point, where if I feel my internet quality is good or not, etc. And I do that. So there is a overlap, and I think there is a case for that. That they are more regulated than these people are, and they should probably. There is a case for regulating them a bit more. If there is a case for regulating the telecom service providers in such fashion, why not these guys? I think that's something that we talked about, even though we may not agree completely with the telecom service providers. We covered some of the aspects of the government's views on this. Do we have some, before we sort of wrap up, do you want to say what are the solutions to the government's view, interests in this particular aspect? There are things that we talked about, the selective banning of certain in certain places, of certain OTT services, and in certain places. What are your views on that? There are issues. There have been many cases in our country where WhatsApp has been banned in the Northeast for some time, or in internet access is like not there for everybody in Jammu and Kashmir, etc. Yeah. What are your views?
So, Sridhar, so this is the second question that TRAI had sought answers to in their consultation paper. So
Correct.
the problem was that usually when there's a conflict in a certain area, internet access is cut off for that entire area, and so that means that people cannot call each other. I mean, basically, the network access itself is cut off, so you can't message anyone on WhatsApp. You can't. Your Netflix or all of those things are also not accessible. So the consultation paper is asking if it's technically feasible to selectively ban applications and not cut off the internet for the entire region. So is that feasible? What are the possible repercussions of such a move? So what we had written in response was that there are serious implications of this kind of a move. Right? So first of all, banning the internet itself is not shown to be a very effective means of containing these kind of situations or spreading misinformation or all of these things. So it's not a very effective tool of doing that, trying to achieve those objectives. And selectively banning certain applications is not going to be. I mean, it's probably going to be worse than banning the entire internet itself. So when you selectively
why do you say that, Bharath? Why do you say selective banning is worse?
So let's say you selectively ban WhatsApp. Okay, so now WhatsApp is owned by a big company, so they have maybe on groups they might be able to take more effective means to stop the spread of disinformation or things like that. So if you selectively ban certain applications and you keep doing that over a period of time, so people will find alternatives to these dominant platforms. They might move to something else that's not as big a platform. You might have a select.
They may not have the ability to moderate at all.
Yeah, moderate it. You might not even be aware of these platforms. You might not even. It might not be run by a company that's
accountable in any form.
Yeah. So these kind of alternative platforms will get more traction, and the people using that might actually be the ones who would not want to use to be subject to the scrutiny, right? So you'll have all of these kind of things coming up, and even if you want to use these platforms, there are ways by using VPNs or something like that to get around these kind of selective bans. So these selective bans might not actually serve the purpose. They might have a lot of other repercussions. So for all of these reasons, I think it's not a good idea. I think, Rijesh, you might want to add something more to this.
No, I think I'm more or less on the only thing I would add is that, as a rule, I think when you want to regulate a space, you should prefer having larger players who you are very well aware of, as opposed to a whole host of players that you don't know much of, purely from a regulation perspective, especially in when you're talking about selective banning. Obviously, there is a law and order situation. There's some national security interest problem happening in the background. So you want the known devil. You don't want unknown devil. Because if people start moving away from WhatsApp to another app, first of all, you don't know what, the app cannot, like all the things that Bharath said. But in addition, you don't know who's made that app, what kind of backdoors are in that app, whether that app itself is there in the first place to drive misinformation. You have no idea.
Mm-hmm.
even the government should prefer to have, say, a WhatsApp operating there, where they at least have some ability to have a conversation and saying, look, situation is bad, whatever reason, we need you to moderate some kinds of content, whatever it is. Whether we agree with that that's a good idea or not, I think that's a better option than saying, let's just ban WhatsApp for a, because, you're not, it's very difficult. Okay? I would almost say it's better to ban the internet than try to ban WhatsApp, but leave the internet open, because that just means I can look for something else and just continue on my way.
So you think like banning the internet is a more effective way of controlling it than
I'm not a fan of that idea, but I'm saying if there's no other option, then ban the internet, but not for like 6 months, 8 months, where it becomes a way of life. Because the longer you give people to adapt to it, then they will adapt. Like, I think during the Ukraine war in the initial days, we saw this when net connections were going down, internet access was going down in Ukraine. People were setting up their own peer-to-peer internet network there, peer-to-peer, to transmit messages and get people moving. So even that is possible. Eventually, people will adapt. So don't do things
absolutely.
Like this.
I think the way technology is, I think the more regulation has always tried hard to keep up with progress in technology. And every time the government tries to regulate, there will be, and the government at best can try to play catch up, right? I mean, it's hard for them to sort of be ahead of technology in terms of what they need to do. And if you ban something, like you said, people will always find a way. Very often, the people who find a way are malicious actors, and controlling them. If that was the objective, you've probably made it easier for the malicious actors to spread disinformation, while legitimate actors might find it difficult to counter those things because they don't have access to the same networks. So I think like banning the internet, trying to selectively ban applications. What I'm hearing from you is that it's not a great idea, and it's something that governments definitely should not try to do. So this was very interesting, and I think like an interesting topic, something that we thought has a well-settled issue, but seems to have sort of come up again. There may be there might be legitimate issues faced by the telecom operators which need to be addressed. There may be some specific issues faced by the government, which in terms of being able to know malicious actors, where they are sending what messages from, etc. Their ability to listen in on some things, in the name of national security, etc. They have managed to do that with regular telephones. So nobody will now talk on the telephone because they now talk on other network OTT messaging platforms, because if they can remain anonymous there, if they can remain untraced there, they're probably happier to do that. So there are some concerns which need to be addressed, and there are some open issues. But thank you very much, Rijesh and Bharath, for sharing your views. And have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takstashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.